Most Americans know that George Washington owned enslaved people at his Mount Vernon home, but fewer probably know that it was his wife, Martha, who dramatically increased the enslaved population there. When they wed in 1759, George may have owned around 18 people. Martha, one of the richest women in Virginia, owned 84. The high number of people Martha Washington owned is unusual, but the fact that she owned them is not. Stephanie E. Jones Rogers, a history professor at the University of California, Berkeley, is compiling data on just how many white women owned slaves in the U.S. And in the parts of the 1850 and 1860 census data she has studied so far, white women make up about 40% of all slave owners. Slaveholding parents typically gave their daughters more enslaved people than land, says Jones Rogers, whose book, They Were Her Property: White Women as Slave Owners in the American South, came out in February 2019. What this means is that their very identities as white Southern women are tied to the actual or the possible ownership of other people. White women were active and violent participants in the slave market. They bought, sold, managed, and sought the return of enslaved people, in whom they had a vested economic interest. Owning a large number of enslaved people made a woman a better marriage prospect. Yes, you heard correctly. Once married, white women fought in courts to preserve their legal ownership over enslaved people as opposed to their husband's ownership, and often won. For them, slavery was their freedom, Jones Rogers observes in her book. Previous scholars have argued that most Southern white women did not buy, sell, or inflict violence on enslaved people because this was considered improper for them. But Jones Rogers discovers that white women were actually trained to participate from a very young age. Their exposure to the slave market is not something that begins in adulthood. It begins in their homes when they are little girls, sometimes infants, when they are given enslaved people as gifts, she says. Citing interviews with formerly enslaved people that the Works Progress Administration, a New Deal agency, conducted in the 1930s, Jones Rogers shows that part of white children's training in plantation management involved beating enslaved people. It did not matter whether the child was large or small, one woman told the WPA. They always beat you till the blood ran down. As adults, white women often tore black women away from their babies so they could nurse the white mistress's baby instead. To this end, white women placed thousands of advertisements in newspapers looking for enslaved wet nurses to feed their own children, and created a huge market for enslaved black women who had recently given birth. Why did these white women want black women to nurse their children?